Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for part 8 of the Metro Budget 101 series. I am Councilwoman Quante Toombs. I'm chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. I'm joined by Councilwoman Delisha Porterfield. She is vice chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, also represents District 29. I represent District 2. Tonight, we are going to do the first part of our public safety series. We're doing a two-part series on public safety, and so we will be talking with Chief Drake of MNPD, also Sheriff Darren Hall of the Davidson County Sheriff's Department, and we're going to start off with Chief Drake. So you have the floor.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Councilwoman Toombs and everyone else for having us on there. We do have a slide. If we can put that up, I'll go through that, and then we'll be available for any questions. So the first slide just talks about our mission statement, and it's all community-based, provide products to make a safe and peaceful Nashville. That's the goal of our police department, is working with the community to provide services, and hopefully the end result, of which I think we've done very well in, is having a safe and peaceful Nashville. And so on slide 2, these are our values, carrying out our mission. Members of the department will continue to value organizational excellence. That's vetting officers from the very beginning, trying to get the right personnel in, training at every level, training in every division that we have, and professionalism. The impartial enforcement of the law, the people we serve, respect and treat them fairly, problem-solving partnerships, which is essential. It's not the police department telling people what they need, but the community telling us what they need, and us working together to make for a better Nashville. Open communication, and then ethics and integrity, doing the right things for the right reasons. This slide here is just a general breakdown of our budget. It shows 5 years from FY16 to FY21. You can see the increases as it goes. Pretty much self-explanatory. Sworn positions has gone up to 1511. It shows 1504 there, but we have 6 officers in MDHA and then 1 in ICAC, International Crimes Against Children. So our next slide there shows our breakdown and the variances that we have. You can see for FY20 remained, we have a savings for 547,000, which was a 0.26%. And it gives a breakdown of what that was for, variance versus actual. Our overtime impacted us. We were 44.52 from overtime costs, primarily from civil unrest after the George Floyd incident, which has sparked a nationwide trend and affected us as well. Salary overage, personal leave time really occurred from the Family Medical Leave Act, and then fringe benefits. It's just part of our costs. And then non-salary overage was 2.36, mostly from MNPD IT expenses, contractual increases. So we had really a very unusual year and unprecedented. If you see the next slide, we had the tornado, which impacted us in March, emergency response for the day of that incident. Security patrols that continued after. We had security to prevent looting. There were several areas around town that we had to maintain safety. Had ongoing traffic control during reconstruction, and that carried on for quite some time, just to ensure that people didn't lose property and was safe in their communities. Then we had COVID, which is still impacting us today. We had the mandate enforcement for masks. We had the unprecedented use of PPE, and really there was a shortage around the country and even here in Metro as well. And so we tried to overstock, but it was so difficult to find it. In fact, it was the White House even got involved in sending the states different PPE to try to keep us from being affected. We still had over 200 personnel that contracted the coronavirus. Glad to say that all are doing well and healthy. And then we also have the staff, the COVID testing, vaccine sites, and then the ongoing mask patrols, and not just for the downtown core, but for all of Nashville, what we call the hub response for the entire city. Also, we had the civil unrest, numerous protests and demonstrations. Although we didn't have violence, but a few of those, we had to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And we had to use a lot of resources to try to keep this city safe and protect our structures and resources. And then we had the incident that shook the city, the Christmas bombing. I saw that, and it looked like someone had dropped a bomb out of a plane. We had the initial response downtown, which covered a vast area. We had overtime and equipment cost. The federal agents came in, but we still provided a lot of resources: drones, Faro scanners, personnel, vehicles, and et cetera, and ongoing through 2015. And really it goes to our mission statement, while never losing sight, it's to maintain a safe and peaceful Nashville. And so moving forward and looking ahead, we've been refocusing our efforts and community policing, repurposing what we're doing, organizational and operational restructuring, realignment of our leadership. We have new leadership at the very top, all the way through the sergeant level. We have the Office of Alternative Policing Strategies, which is new, a newly created position of inspector, where we're looking to have group violence intervention and then also trying to identify juvenile high-risk offenders and try to intervene. Police department's been arresting for years and years, and it's been like a revolving door. So we're hoping to close that revolving door and try to connect some of these people, some of these kids away from a life of crime, and hopefully we're going to have better results. We started an enhanced shift. On here it says power shift, but it's really called the enhanced shift. And that's where we took 9 additional officers and a sergeant and put them on duty between 5 p.m. and 3 a.m. To have more officers on the street. And that's when most violent crime was occurring, or most crime period. And for a detail, only have between 7 to 10 officers. Now we have as many as 18 to 20. I think that's going to show us some very good results. So far, it's been tremendous. We've already apprehended homicide suspects, robbery suspects, have significant leads on sitting on something right now as I speak. So very good results from that. It's just repurposing what we already have, and it doesn't have an impact on our budget right now. We centralize our homicide investigations. That's a national best practice. It was decentralized, where all of the precincts had detectives that would investigate a murder, but then also be assigned a burglary or theft from vehicle. And if that burglary or theft from vehicle had a harder lead, they had to follow that, and that would detract from investigating the ultimate crime, which was a homicide. And so instead of having 2 detectives respond to a scene, we have as many as 6 to 12. And right now, of the homicides we've had, we only have 3 that we don't have any leads on. So we've made significant progress on a clearance rate that had dropped from about 86% to 46%. We're looking to get back well above 70 to 80% and close out these cases. It's a very small number of people commit the majority of the crime. And so adage, they used to say 20% of the people commit 80% of the crime. And so we're looking at precision policing, identifying those people, going after them, and not only arrest them, but trying to see ways we could intervene where possible. We have the Titans detectives. That's another repurpose where we took some of our gang detectives and we took also officers from our juvenile crimes task force, teamed them together to go back in the neighborhoods after a shooting incident to better recanvass an area and identify suspects. To me, the theory has always been when you have a crime that occurs like a piece of a puzzle, all the pieces are there. You have the victim, the suspect, you have the evidence, you have witnesses, and then over time it dissipates and becomes cold. And so the theory is if we can get as many people there as possible, as quickly as possible, then we can solve these crimes a lot quicker. And we've had great success by doing this so far. We started a new branch called the Interpersonal Crimes and Special Victims Division. It's really having someone over all these crimes that intersect domestic violence, youth services, sex crimes, and human trafficking, all coordinated together. By bringing all these people together, divisions and advocates, we can have better success in helping victim services and also holding offenders accountable. All that while also strengthening community partnerships, which has been the theme all along with community engagement and partnerships. We started a new office, a chief diversity officer, whose main thing is to have a rapport and relationship with the COB and with NOAA and with other groups, but then also to oversee our community engagement division is very diverse. We have an individual that's Muslim, Kurdish, Vietnamese, African-American, white, male, female, etc., that are going out and making connections with the community. We had the Kurdish community that told us they hadn't had a relationship with the police department since 2004. I went out last Saturday to have a meeting with all the leaders at Plaza Mariachi, and it was unprecedented. All the leaders showed up, and they want to have more interaction. They actually want to have some of their members become police officers. And so that's a lot of what we're doing. Crisis intervention, we're looking at having a co-response program to where a plainclothes officers team with mental health experts. We feel that there's some grant opportunities available, so that's not going to impact our budget right off. Those grants should help us. So we're in the process of working on that, and we'll submit it in mid-February with our 22 budget. We're refocusing our recruitment efforts, trying to make sure we have a very diverse police department. Historically, what candidates have done is they would go to nashville.gov/police, fill out an application, and then go through the vetting process. I purposely pull a very diverse group out of patrol to make a recruitment unit so they can proactively recruit officers, so we can continue casting the wide net and get the officers that we get, but then we also can be intentional about some of the officers that we get too, and that's a theory behind that. Our key funding needs, staffing needs for 9th Precinct. It takes a minimum of 1 year for a newly hired officer to become an independent resource. They go through 6 months of training, then additional 6 months in the field before they're cut out on their own with a field training officer. Additional fleet resources, we'll need additional vehicles. We've had times, especially during civil unrest, where we didn't have enough vehicles and had officers that had to be bused. We partnered with the Downtown Partnership to actually have drivers put people in buses to help us during civil unrest. And so building up our fleet is going to be key. Training Academy was built in the 1960s. It's inadequate for what we're trying to do to have the number of classes. We're allocated for 1,511 officers. We need more for a growing, vibrant city. And if we can build our training academy, we can better work towards that goal. Mounted Patrol facility is already in the works, but we're having to go to a temporary site until that can be built. And then the APHIS fingerprint system, which is outdated and we need more software. So that's what I have, and will answer whatever questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Chief Drake, for that presentation. I was really excited to hear about a few of those programs, especially that co-response program. Very, very excited to hear about that. I know we discussed some of those options, so appreciate you for moving forward and implementing that in such a timely manner. So we received a few questions, some that you've already covered. So you did go through the budget. Can you give us an idea of how much of your budget actually goes towards the personnel, and how many officers and staff, people on staff, do you have currently?
So currently we have 1,350 sworn personnel, 51 PO1s, and 90 police officer trainees are not included. We also have 495 civilians. 90.18% of our budget goes to personnel. So the majority is for our personnel.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that information.
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about your training budget? Like how much is spent per officer on training, and what type of trainings do officers receive, and what is that total cost?
Okay, the total cost for training is about $12.3 million a year, and that includes the salary of officers, the fringe, and and also all equipment and vehicles. And the training is really some of the best in the country. For Tennessee, it calls for crisis intervention training of 40 hours. We do 100. We do de-escalation training, which has been a big theme of what I've tried to do since I've been the chief here, is just telling officers to lose a sense of urgency, and that when time is on our side, we can pull back and wait and get the appropriate response there. We go over domestic violence training, and just really it's a robust training, but I think it's one of the best in the country.
To follow up, Chief Drake, how much do you typically spend on a training class, and how large are those classes typically?
Okay, the classes range from, we've had some classes of 90 officers, and then some as small as about 19, and that was a lateral class, so it all depends from there. And Samir, can you give me the number of the actual for a year? I'll get there for you. 1 second on that.
And while he's getting that number for us, are you graduating, like if you start with 90, are you graduating 90, or are you graduating a smaller number than that?
Smaller number, it just depends. Sometimes we may have 80 that start, and we'll graduate maybe 65, just go through attrition. Some may not, may flunk out in the law portion or physical training. And so we're changing our training standard. So for recruits that come into the training academy now, what we're doing is providing them a handbook. This is what you need to look for. This is how you need to prepare for law. This is what you need to read. Instead of people maybe not passing because they can't pass a 1.5 mile run. When I came through the training academy, I set the PT record. It stood for about 15 years. I never chased anyone in my 33-year career 1.5 miles on foot. And so that's just something we have to look at and change and make it more practical, going through an obstacle course, finding a dummy that's about 160 pounds and dragging it out of harm's way, what an officer may typically do, running over a fence, trying to get someone out of danger. So I got this from Samir. It's just $6 million. I can't read it right now. It's about $6 million per class of 75.
Chief, we average 15% attrition in the academy class.
Okay.
That's our average.
Okay. We average about a 15% attrition in our classes.
So that 15% attrition, is that resulting in money lost for the department? Because you spent the money for the training for those folks. How much do you think that you lose on average per class?
Well, the 15% attrition, we can get you that actual number, but it's based on about $1 million. Mm-hmm.
And do you have a budget for recruitment? I know you mentioned that you took some officers and made a recruitment team. Are you putting any monies towards recruiting officers?
Yes, that's all part of our $12.3 million budget. We just repurposed officers that we already had in patrol, and we put them into recruitment.
And can you talk a little bit more, because I know you said you diversified that recruitment team. Are there any other efforts you're making towards making sure there's diversity in your recruitment efforts?
Yes, I mean, that's all part of our community engagement is people getting to know us. And I've actually had people reaching out to me. They've contacted me personally that want to become police officers, from Caucasians to Blacks to females, etc., who actually have more neighboring agencies for the first time that's surrounding Nashville that want to be a part of our police department. And we're really looking at some diverse people who are saying, hey, we want to be police officers here. So I really see change beginning to happen. And so we have our community engagement efforts. We have our teams. We have the Office of Community Engagement. And then we also have our recruitment team that's proactively going out to universities, going out to, say, Fort Campbell and other places, and actually looking at lateral classes as well, as where we can pick resources.
And so you talked about, I know that a little over 90% of your budget is personnel. So what's for a typical officer just starting, what's the average salary and benefits for that officer?
Average salary is about $68,000 in salary, but when you add fringe, equipment, and vehicle, it's about $162 per officer.
Is it 162?
Yes, ma'am.
Chief Drake, thank you for that, and thank you for. I'm really glad to hear that there are more women interested in law enforcement and police enforcement. So that's very encouraging. Can you speak a little bit about the commanders, and do the commanders get their own budgets for the individual precincts, and what's the flexibility like in creating those budgets? I know just from experience that, the needs that the Hermitage precinct, which primarily services District 29, Hermitage and South, but I know like the needs in one precinct may look a lot different than the needs of another precinct. So how do you all do that budgeting at that level?
Yeah, so every precinct commander is given their own budget. They go through it, and then they submit it back to our fiscal section, to our analysts, and then it's reviewed by the executive staff. And we try to provide all the, what the commander needs. So they're actively involved in the process, and then it's vetted all the way up to my office.
Okay, thank you so much. And how do you all determine your budget priorities? I know you said that the 90% is going to the personnel. So the other 10% of that budget, can you kind of talk about what that other 10% looks like and how you determine what you're going to prioritize?
Yes, it goes through the executive leadership. And so we come up with a list of items that we need, and then the executive staff gets together and then they vote on what's the most urgent need. And we go through a number of 1 through whatever and make that our priorities. So, for instance, if we have, whatever that need is, it's going to be the number 1 priority. So.
Thank you. And then I want to double back a little bit, follow up from one of Councilmember Toombs' questions when we were talking about training. What's the total salary and benefits that a typical officer receives? And do you know how that compares to officers in surrounding districts or surrounding areas?
Yes, a typical salary is about $66,000 for an officer. They have a step, well, that's with step 5. You get a 6% education pay, and then 25.9 in fringe benefits. And so the average is about 92.7.
Sorry about that. I was having a hard time unmuting.
You know what? I was doing a presentation once and I was talking and everybody was looking, and then finally someone said I was muted. And so I spent about 5 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. I do have a few more follow-up questions, but I'm going to kick it over to Councilmember Toombs for some questions. And Councilmember Hauser, we do see your hand, so we will acknowledge you in just one moment.
So, Chief Drake, you talked about the community policing. I know that you recently announced a partnership with Vanderbilt University Medical Center to help with mental health calls. Are you using part of the department's budget for that, or how are you doing those programs and partnerships?
It is. It's just part of our budget, part of our training, where we're training all of our officers and partnering with Vanderbilt University Medical Center to treat anyone that needs a potential service if we have a situation. We just try to make sure our officers are well versed and prepared should they be needed. Trauma care, etc. So.
Do you foresee there being an increased cost for those partnerships at some point? Or do you think that it could be maintained within the police department's current budget?
Yeah, I think we can maintain it. There may be an increase. It's hard to predict that, but I think right now we can maintain it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we hear the question sometimes about certain duties that the police take on that some people feel could be better done under a different umbrella, a different agency or a different department. So you're doing this partnership with Vanderbilt University to assist with mental health calls. Do you think that a portion of the police budget could be taken to provide those same services, but under a different umbrella, perhaps with a different mental health agency or a different, social services or something like that? How do you respond to those types of questions that, hey, police shouldn't be providing mental health services, that should be under a different umbrella?
Yeah, I disagree with that. I really think it should remain with us, and that's why I talk about the co-response model. I've even talked to the mental health experts, and they feel the co-response model is actually going to be a better approach. And so we would keep our resources, partner with the mental health cooperative as experts, but then also have our plainclothes officers that's there for protection. And also they have 100 hours of crisis intervention training, which will go well in response. I feel that once we put this together, it's going to be a model that Nashville can be proud of. And actually, I'm hoping with this and a lot of other things that we do, it can be a national standard, that people look at Nashville as having the best approach. When we also look at that, over 90% of our budget is personnel. So any cuts would mean that we have to cut personnel within our police department. And we're allocated for 1511 if we had, even if we were fully staffed, we're still 200 to 300 officers short of what we need to be for a city our size. And that's really why we're repurposing our resources and creating enhanced shifts, having a Titans team to go back to recanvas. It's putting additional resources that we have already within the department to try to have more of an effect and not be totally a reactive police department, but proactive. And I think we're going to see some huge benefits, but I think we'll see even more as we have more officers on the department.
So just to push on that a little bit, so you said that you're 200 or 300 officers short. Would you have that issue of being short 200 or 300 officers if you were just doing police work, meaning not doing the mental health calls, not doing traffic accidents or things of that nature? What do you think about that? If you were just doing the traditional police work, the robberies, the murders, the assaults, would you still feel like you were short 200 to 300 officers?
I believe so. I think it's hard to speculate on how it would look if we didn't respond to those types of calls. It's just traditionally what we've done. Even when we look at our school resource officers, they're in schools providing protection, but we're looking at repurposing them as well to have an effect to try to identify kids that may be headed down a path to work closer with the school system, closer with the juvenile court system, et cetera, to try to intervene and connect the services. And so to pull out and leave some places that may not have the resources to provide adequate services, I think will create more problems for the city.
Thank you, Chief Drake, and I really appreciate you talking about repurposing the school resource officers. As a former educator, I saw SROs in our schools, and I think something you said was key, like identifying early students who may need additional supports. And I think that through wraparound services with our schools and social workers, I do think that that's a great way to help identify students who may need additional levels of support. I do want to kind of follow up on Councilmember Toombs' question, and I love to hear that you are interested in making Nashville a model for what other precincts do across the country. That makes me really, really happy to hear. I've studied some police work across the country and familiar with what places are doing, and I would love to see Nashville on the list leading that. To push back a little bit on one of those questions and what Councilmember Toombs asked about, the mental health services and, traffic enforcement. If we did, let's say that we did have a traffic enforcement division that, these may not be a typical trained police officer in the police gear, an armed officer per se. If we had peace officers, or if we had traffic monitors, so to speak, or someone who was responding to, we get a lot of calls for like speeding and, drag racing and things of that nature. And I know with the drag racing, you all have found like additional things that have come with like some of those drag racing calls, but just the typical person that is speeding down Nashville Boulevard or Bell Road, and people are asking for police officers to come out with that enforcement. Do you think that it would be a better utilization of your budget if those, highly trained armed police officers are focusing more on the, the robberies, the rapes, the domestic violence calls, and having officers that have just a specific training for traffic enforcement that is not an armed officer, and maybe even like even if they're not plain clothes. I mean, sometimes you see the officers in like the lime green shirts or, like a more relaxed apparel. So would it help your budget if our highly trained officers are focusing on those calls, and we had a different subset of people that may not even fall under the police department, maybe that falls under public works or falls under a different department to handle those types of calls?
So in my opinion, I think it would put more people in danger. When we look at our correlation of crimes, homicides are up, aggravated assaults are up. And then we look at theft from motor vehicles. We have over 2,600 guns that are stolen, almost 3,000 vehicles. And so when you look at those two factors, you take a vehicle that's stolen, guns that's within it, then people now have a conveyance and also a weapon to go out and commit their robberies, aggravated assaults, and shooting incidents. To have a civilian or someone out responding to enforcement of traffic, I think would put a lot of people in harm's way. I don't think that would be a good approach. I have thought about the idea of looking at a civilian aspect of the police department to respond to traffic crashes, because a lot of that is for insurance purposes. And so we're really taking a report for the insurance companies to follow up on. Memphis has a similar model. I've talked to Chief Rawlings up there. That is something that I've been exploring for traffic crashes. But I think as far as enforcement, I think it would be better served for us to continue. I know, and I can tell you from a personal experience from when I was an officer years ago, I made a traffic stop of an individual, just a routine stop for expired tags. I've seen him fumbling around in his car. I went around to the passenger side. He had a .357 gun with the tips. The bullets fell down to try to penetrate my vest. And I was able to take him into custody without incident. And I asked him what he was going to do. He said he had a drug habit, and if I had walked up to the driver's door, he was going to shoot me. And so I'm an armed officer, so we don't want to put people from Public Works and other places in harm's way, because some of the most mundane things blow up to be big situations.
I definitely appreciate you giving us that example. I would hope that that's the exception and not the rule, and that's not happening every time you all are pulling somebody over for speeding or when there's a fender bender. So, Chief Drake, we've kind of went down this road. We've had some of these conversations before, so I'll continue to talk to you outside of this meeting about just suggestions and ideas of what we could do to reimagine what public safety looks like here in Nashville. I did have a follow-up question about the 100 hours of crisis training. Does every officer receive that training, and is that already included in the $12.3 million training budget?
It is. Every officer receives that, and it is included in the budget. So
okay,
we go above and beyond the state standard. So, yeah.
And we did have a question from Councilmember Hauser. Councilmember Hauser, I see you put your hand down, but if you still have a question, if you can unmute, you're recognized.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, there were two different questions that I have. One has to do with the fact that as we talk to our constituents when it comes around the budget time, one of the things they want to know is, what do I get for my money? And what I want to know is, what do they get if we don't spend the money? In other words, you as a police department are asking for certain budget items. I think it would be helpful if there is some way to define that on what the public is getting. In other words, if we're adding training, or if we're adding equipment, or if we're adding something, what does that mean to Joe on the street? And so that would be very helpful to us as we're talking to constituents, if you could include that language in some manner that you're communicating with us on your request. And the second question that I'm going to throw out has to do with issues related to our homeless population, which is growing for several reasons. And part of that is I know that under our current number of officers, we really do not have enough officers to respond to some of the nonviolent issues that are happening. But I do wonder if there's any sort of records that are kept of individuals that are picked up for trespassing or some of these more minor things, what that cost is to us. And the reason I mention that is in regards to affordable housing and looking at other alternatives for those individuals. If there was a way I can show it's costing us X dollars because these folks aren't being housed and taken care of, and it would cost us X dollars to make a dent in that, I'm more likely to get buy-in from other council members and from our constituents. And I'll be quiet and let you respond.
All right. That's very, very good questions. Thank you for that. So for the first one, we're looking at creating a dashboard for our police department for the public to be able to utilize. And we'll have everything that our police department is doing, what services that we're providing, what services are being done, what are we doing in a particular community, you'll actually be able to click on that icon and see what's happening in your neighborhood, what we're doing, to be able to submit questions, to be interactive. And so that's coming really soon. We've talked to our SPD and IT department, also Metro IT, about putting that into place so we can actually discuss, what people are receiving, what you're not getting, and then they can tell us what they expect, what they want, which is what we really want from community engagement. We want them to be able to tell us what they want. As far as the homeless population, displaced individuals, we started a quality of life team and it's just repurposed from one of our flex teams to be able to interact and connect our displaced and homeless personnel to services, working with the Homeless Impact Division, with Park Center, et cetera, and getting people off the street. And so the Homeless Impact Division has made a hotel out in South Nashville where they're working with some clientele to get them into housing and hopefully transition into better. But we can find out what that cost would be of arresting and releasing. But what we're actually looking to do, is because realizing we can't arrest our way out of this, is to be able to connect all of our homeless and displaced, as many to the extent possible, to services. I've had communications with Judy Tackett about coordinating all of the homeless advocates to work together. She's actually putting together a meeting that I'll be involved in. And so we're working towards with their budget as well. I believe they have a pretty good amount they can work with, and we're going to work with them, and it won't cost us any more to do that.
Thank you, Councilmember Hauser. We will be transitioning in just a moment to the sheriff's presentation. So if the sheriff's department wants to go ahead and get prepared to get set up for those to share their presentation. My last question for you, Chief Drake, as we're doing that transition, I would be remiss and I would not be able to show my face in Antioch if I did not ask you the question about the 9th precinct. So that's one of the questions that we get all the time. The 9th precinct on Murfreesboro Road, what is the status? The community is wanting to know what can they do to help push this project forward. What is it that they need to they just want to know what's happening with it.
Well, just to say, I live in Antioch myself, and so I'm a resident there, and so yes. And so I'm hopeful that we'll have the 9th precinct as well. I think there's going to be some good news, hopefully, on the horizon that all just await for the capital spending budget to come out and see. I totally support having a 9th precinct, but then making it the model as well of a precinct, but having not only a precinct, but having an aspect of the community can be involved as well, where they don't have to ask us for permission to use certain portions of the building. They can have meetings. We can potentially build a small soccer field to have our diverse community from out there, Kurdish, Hispanic, et cetera, that can come and be a part of that neighborhood and just continue to build on community engagement. And I think my vision of that precinct is going to be state of the art and one that we all can be proud of.
Thank you so much. And I just received one more question, and then Councilmember Welsh, you'll be the last question that we take right now. And if there's time after Sheriff Hall's presentation, if there's still time, then we can circle back if there are more questions. The question that I just received, Chief Drake, was with regards to the militarization of police and what portion of the budget. Can you speak to what does that mean from from MMPD's perspective? And I think the community may have one thought of what that means, and I think MMPD may have a different thought. So can you speak about what that means and what percentage of your budget may go to items that members of the community may have questions about, tear gas and things of that nature?
All right, so we do have OC spray on officers, but that's only for combative individuals. I wouldn't call that a militaristic item. I think it's a item of de-escalation, less lethal force. Without using OC spray, you have to use hand strikes or baton strikes or more. And I think that keeps us away from using that. As far as militarization, we do have some rifles that have been donated from the military, but they're ceremonial, that our drill and ceremony team uses just for exhibition. We do have 4 helicopters that was given from the military. They're Vietnam era helicopters from the 1960s. In fact, when I was up in one recently, we had to go up above a Southwest plane that was coming in. It was vibrating. So I felt it's time to get something a little safer. But as far as militarization, we don't have items military. We do have a SWAT team, but they're geared for hostage and barricade situations, just to be prepared for if we have an incident like in Las Vegas, where we have a shooter on top of a rooftop, or another incident of bombing. We need to be able to respond, but we're not a militaristic organization. We're geared more towards community engagement and problem solving.
Thank you so much. And Councilmember Welsh, we'll quickly recognize you. And again, if anyone else has any questions after Councilmember Welsh, if you don't mind holding those to the end of Sheriff Hall's presentation, and we will definitely address them if time permits. So after Councilmember Welsh asks her question, if we can have the representatives from the Sheriff's Department to go ahead and start their presentation. I believe you will need if we can have someone from IT to switch the sharing capability over to Sheriff Hall's office, we would appreciate it. You are recognized, Councilmember Welsh.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Porterfield. I think that many of you know that I am someone who would like to change the funding of our police department to be more efficient and more effective in our city. And I believe that it's more especially in terms of mental health, I think it is really important that we think about diverting our dollars towards organizations and personnel that have advanced training in these areas. You know, the job of the police is to police, and the nuance and the understanding and the techniques that go into dealing with mental health crises on the street. 100 hours of training is not really going to give you all the skills that you need. And I say this as someone who has been a mental health phone counselor, a sexual assault phone counselor. We had much more hours of training than that, and still we could not adequately address things. And that was on the phone. And the police, in your position, you're dealing with these things one-on-one. I just feel like it's kind of an inefficient use of our budget. And also in terms of schools, correlating children's experience in schools with resource officers that are having problems related to policing kind of, I think, brings in a nuance that is not, it's not a criminal matter. It's not something that should be associated with policing. So I think this is something that maybe we need to divert. So I guess my question is, if you, Commander Drake, are willing to jettison some of those things that are actually, I feel, a burden to your department and make your department less efficient. I mean, and I say that as someone who hears complaints from my own constituents about police not being able to respond in a timely manner to concerns that they have because maybe they're out on mental health crises that they're not necessarily prepared to respond to in a good way. Are you willing to at least consider that maybe that is something that we should divert dollars to make it more efficient for people who are experiencing these crises, that they can be better dealt with and the outcomes will be better overall, and we take them out of the purview of the police department?
I really feel like our best approach, and we've talked to the mental health experts with Mental Health Co-op, and they've said that they felt that the best approach is a co-response model, that they would not feel safe responding to these situations by themselves without the police department. We are prepared to work with them. I think that would be a great model for everyone to see. Other cities have the co-response model as well. I think that would be highly beneficial. Working as a school resource officer should not be about just making arrests. It's about building relationships, and that's something that I've done my entire career. In fact, I was receiving the Martin Luther King Award, and I ran into some kids that are now grown men, and they were so excited. They would say, Officer Drake, Officer Drake. They had no idea that I was Chief Drake. It didn't matter to them. I was someone that had built a relationship with them years ago, and they just saw me in that light. I think that having SROs focused on continuing to build those relationships, continuing strong bonds, and helping kids, I think is still our best path towards success. I think having schools, resource officers in schools also prevents some of these school shootings that we see around the country, and having them the marked police car out in front of the school. I think that's just going to be beneficial for us, in my opinion.
Thank you so very much, Chief. Thank you, Councilmember Welsh. And we're going to turn it over to Sheriff Hall. You have the floor.
Wow, okay, that's great. I enjoyed listening to you guys. So, yeah, so thank you very much. I think based on some instructions, we do have a PowerPoint as well, and I think we've got the technology squared away. So if it's okay, I'll go through this. Try not to go. I'm sure it'll feel fast, but save time to ask any questions, of course, at the end. So I'll do my best and get. Let me get my technology settled first. 1 second, just so I don't. Let's see. Hang on 1 second. We are clicking buttons. Hang on 1 second. So okay, all right. So I think I can see. I hope that's showing up for you guys. Yeah. So. I've been in this line of work all of my life. I've been elected, I guess, about 20 years ago now. I was running for this office. Once elected, I took the management team that I had formed, and we went down to a state park here close by. And I've always liked this way of thinking about it, that I would never get on a plane if I didn't know where it was going. And our job was to tell people in the community where we were trying to go. And the way you do that, obviously, is come up with a mission statement, but also live the mission statement. And so in our mission, we have 4 pillars that we live by, and those things are here in front of you. And I'd like to spend a second or two talking about what they mean to us and how. One of those is accountability. It's a word that we use a lot. We have a responsibility to hold some people accountable that the system, the judicial and the law enforcement system says that they are to be incarcerated. So we're holding that group accountable. But most importantly, we are accountable to the public. As an elected official, as you guys both know, most of the folks on the call know, the public are really quick to tell you that. They're quick to tell me that. I work for them. They put me in this job. That is an honor, but I'm accountable to them. And I believe that and live that in my job. The sheriff's office is the largest independently elected office in the county. You can take every elected office, every budget dollar, every employee of every other elected office, and we are twice as big as they are combined. It is a very large part of the government, an extremely large elected office because of our responsibilities. And so it's important that we are aware that we work for the community. We also think it's important. I think it's very important that we hold our employees accountable. We tell them that the very first day. I like to think that we have an aggressive disciplinary process in our agency. But really what that means is that we want to hold you accountable to the rules and the expectations we have once we've trained you. That does not mean we fire everyone, but it does mean we hold you accountable. We think that's important because ultimately the public believe that we work for them and we should hold our employees accountable. Although that's true, and that's who I am as a person, the word redemption is incredibly important to me personally, as a manager of this organization, and also a person who's overseeing many people who are in custody. I believe our job is to provide opportunities for those individuals to make changes in their lives. If we're going to do that, then we also need to believe in redemption for that person and also for the employee who may make a mistake tonight. We're going to hold them accountable for their mistake. We believe you can get over that mistake and obviously move on in your life and be productive. And so it's an important part of accountability. The other pillar, the second pillar of our organization is diversity. And this is 20 years ago. This wasn't yesterday. And I want everyone in the community to understand this. This isn't something that we took off because everybody in the community was talking about being more diverse. 20 years ago, it wasn't talked about like this. But I'm very proud of this. We have the most racially diverse agency in the entire government. When I say that, there are some very, very small parts of Metro that wouldn't qualify. I'm talking about of the large organizations throughout the government. As you can tell, 51% of our employees are white, 44% of those are Black, and 5% classify themselves as other. Not only are we racially diverse compared to Metro, but we're more diverse in the community we serve. That is unheard of in the world of public safety or law enforcement or whatever you want to categorize us as. I don't know of another community this large in this country that is more diverse, its employees, than the city in which we live. Obviously, that's Nashville's racial breakdown as it relates to some recent data, being 57% white and 29% Black. We are 51%, as I mentioned a minute ago, white and 44% Black. Extremely proud of that. But as I tell people all the time, we don't run down the hallway and say, let's get our numbers up or let's make the numbers work. I personally believe you either believe in diversity or you don't. I'm not a huge fan of diversity officers just because that feels like you're being forced or enforced to do it. I believe you should be diverse as an organization, and we've been that way for 20 years. Although it's oftentimes talked about in categories like race and gender and other things, I think it's incredibly important in an organization this large that is dealing with multi-disciplinary types of issues that we also appreciate diverse opinions. I do not want people who work for me, who look like me and talk like me and walk like me and think like me. I don't think that's a very rich organization. I want people who obviously are diverse in the way we look and the way we are, but it's also important that we have diverse sets of opinions. Another part of our pillar, the third pillar, is integrity. I've always told my kids and my family always told me it's what you do when no one's looking. What makes this important is jails in our community are a place most people can't look. Unfortunately, it's a very closed environment, the way they're designed. The public really don't have an open set of eyes to see into those. So it's very important that what we're doing when no one is looking, i.e. no one can see, is the right thing, that we have the integrity, whether we're being looked at directly or not. I think it's important that the public trust our responsibility. What does that mean? We have the responsibility for tonight some 1,400 men and women who are in custody and another 1,000 or so employees that are entrusted that we're going to make them a safe and secure place to live and work. And the public give us a lot of money, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that they also expect us to be trusted with. The other part of this word that I think is very important is you should step up and say when you fall short. We're going to make mistakes tonight. We're going to make mistakes tomorrow. We're going to make mistakes with the council and the world that we live in and the community at large. I have learned over the years that people will, if you can accept your responsibility, they can move forward, whether that be an officer or a person in misconduct, or quite frankly, we in my role, not communicating all the information we have at certain times when we're trying to get through a circumstance. And so I think we should accept responsibility, and I think the public will understand that when we also fall short. Professionalism is the last pillar of our organization. A lot of people use this word. I will tell you what it means to us. I grew up in the sheriff's office at a time where it learned from each other. It did not learn from outside experts and people who were what I consider to be more knowledgeable of the system. It was important to me years ago that we get our agency learning from others from all over the country, all over the world, to professionalize our organization. Just a few months ago in Nashville, in the sheriff's office, I was the president of the National Sheriff's Association. The vice president of the American Correctional Association is our chief of corrections, and our director of compliance in our organization was the president of the American Jail Association. That has never happened in the history of any of these associations, where all three were represented by one jurisdiction in our country. And we still have a lot of folks who are involved nationally in all sorts of issues. I think we are a better organization because of it, and we're looked to all over the country in trying to help other communities like ours. We are one of the few people in the country where our entire organization is accredited. Every facility we operate, our training facility, our headquarters, less than 5% of the country's jails are accredited, and we're very proud to be one of the few that do that. It is a way to make our policies and practices accepted not only by the local jurisdictions, but by the federal courts and the country as a whole. Very proud of that. Our staff, many of them are recognized nationally and internationally. Our chief of corrections has been internationally all over the country and helping develop standards and training. Our chief of staff is trained nationally in all sorts of different areas of communication. We've got our training staff that have trained all over the country and are asked for to travel throughout the world to help train in a very specialized world of corrections. It's a difficult thing to find really good people, and we've got some of the best there is in our organization. This is my favorite phrase about being the sheriff. I've always said that everything we do communicates something. And what that means is what you look like and what you act like and what you say and what you write, how you treat people and what you do is communicating something. And when you work for the sheriff's office, I believe you work for the government, and quickly the people in this community will tell us, we pay you your salaries, and therefore we should be professional to the community. We should be professional in the way we look, act, walk, and talk. It's very important to me as the leader of this organization that we're communicating what I think the community would be proud of. It's an important part of who we are. An overview of the sheriff's office as a whole, just kind of some facts that will help, and don't hold me to the exact number. For example, I think our employee number is 1,006, but let me just say we have 1,000 employees in our organization. Our budget is $100 million. I've got an asterisk here. We're going to talk about this a few times. That budget of $100 million is including a pending core civic supplemental. Basically, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the city council and others decided to move away from the private contract. And so the cost of operating that facility is needed, or supplemental is needed, so that we can then pay those employees and the meals and so forth. And then the state of Tennessee would be required to reimburse the city council and the mayor's office for our costs. And so that supplemental will be coming to the council. I've rolled it into our number. Our budget's about $80 million. The supplemental will be somewhere in the $15 million range. And so if you'll just let me use the 100 tonight, that's what I'm referencing. Roughly 82% of our budget is salary and benefits. You heard Chief Drake earlier talk about 90 to 92% of his. Obviously, all of our folks do not have vehicles and other things that are a little more costly, but our budget's about 80 to 82% salary and benefits. One of the things I'm most proudest of and the work that we do is extremely hard to find good people to work in this line of work. When you find them, you should keep them. And what does that mean? We have one of the lowest turnover rates in the country in what we do. Part of what I think people want in an organization like this is to feel heard, is to feel that their voice matters and how policies operate, that they have a chance to move up and move around, that they understand what's going on. I spent hours yesterday dealing with a group of people with surveys that we do with all of our employees. We take that group into focus groups. We're having focus groups for the next 4 weeks, talking about issues of wellness for staff. In this box, you'll see the letters STEP. About 10 years ago, I grew up here, had a lot of employees that work here with me that grew up in this system. And I noticed there were a lot of people who had institutional knowledge and really good employees who had reached a time in their experience here that they wanted to go retire, but also not give up their identity. And so we developed a program over 10 years ago that's called Starting to Enjoy Your Pension. That's what STEP stands for. It allows people who are pension eligible to walk out, take your pension. I will hire you back at the hourly rate in which you were. There's a lot of great things that come out of this, but because you guys are over budgets, I want to explain that portion of it. Let me use $100,000 as a salary just to make the numbers easier. $100,000 salary and $40,000 in benefits. That employee would be costing the sheriff's office $140,000 tonight. The STEP program allows 2/3 of that cost to move to the pension fund, something that is very solvent. It has all the money in the world to pay pensions. And so what happens here is they've earned their pension. They deserve their pension. Their health care is forever going to be paid for because they deserve it. What that employee does is go to the pension, accept the pension, they start drawing that monthly, they get their health care covered forever, and now I'm only paying 19 hours a week because that's all they can work. Their pension matches the other part. Oftentimes people make more money than they were making full-time. It is the happiest employees we have. We have nearly 100 of them. They love the program. It's fantastic. And the best part is we didn't lose the institutional knowledge. They did not lose their identity. We've saved the city a lot of money. I'm extremely proud of what that's been able to do. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we're recognized as one of the best managers in the country. Where I get that from is because we are accredited in an area that is hard to do, very rare, and 5% of the jails in the country are accredited nationally. Many more prisons are than jails because, quite frankly, prisons are easier to run than jails are. I have worked in both. Again, the block I mentioned earlier, I want you to know we want to be known for this because we want to look like our community, because when you walk in the door to be hired, I want you to see people who look like you and act like you and feel like you. I want you to look like the people who may be incarcerated. Our community should be represented in the population that is incarcerated, and our staff should be equally represented. So very proud of that as a part of who we are. Just real quickly, the responsibilities of the sheriff's office by charter, and I'm just kind of high level here. We have the custody of all arrestees in Davidson County. Every person who is arrested by any law enforcement agency in Nashville is then turned over to us. That equates to us running 4 detention facilities tonight. Those numbers have moved over the years, but tonight it's 4 detention facilities. In October 2020, many of you know this, we took responsibility for the privately managed core civic facility. That supplemental that I mentioned earlier would be the cost that ultimately would be paid back by the state. Our average daily population today and in those 4 facilities is in the neighborhood of 1,400 per day. The other major responsibility for the sheriff's office in this community is we're responsible for all civil law enforcement. Law enforcement's a little heavy word, but all the civil work for the government. That is evictions. There's a lot of conversations going on about evictions. We are at the arm of the court. The court orders us to do evictions or not, or orders us to issue an order of protection, or orders us to issue a garnishment or divorce or child custody and support. We have officers all over the community serving these papers in every council district and every community there is, because all sorts of these issues overlap. And when the charter was written in the 60s, when the voters decided to split up the police and sheriff, what it basically said was the sheriff's or the police department would handle the principal conservator piece, which really means a principal law enforcement, criminal law enforcement, and that the sheriff would run the jails and the civil process for our community. That's what we do and how we do it. You guys were having conversations about traffic and other issues they're not necessarily criminal in nature. A lot of these things over the years have moved and landed into, and I think, in the right locations. But it's a large part of what we do that you may or may not see us every day in doing. Another responsibility for the sheriff's office, we oversee security for the metro buildings, most of them anyway. All of the courthouses, Howard School, the Ford Ice Centers that are obviously lately with the predators. We have a contract with the company that works for us in that contract. We also have our own, as you might call them, deputies, but basically staff that are working security in a variety of buildings. Here's what I would like for you to know about us, if nothing else. My son, when he was 6 years old, I was walking through the kitchen. I've been doing this all my life. I was walking through the kitchen, and he was 6 in the first grade, and he stopped me. He said, "Dad, what do you do?" And I had really never thought about how I explain this to a first grader. And so I took him in a room. I've been doing this all my life. He's heard that name. The phone rings at all hours. The media is involved. There's all sorts of things that happen. I would have just thought he knew. But I really took him in the room, and I sat down with him, and I wanted him to understand what I think I'm doing. And I said to him, I run timeout. And what I wanted him to understand, in our house, timeout really means that you just sit right here, and I want you to think about what you're doing. I'm going to think about what I'm doing. And in a few minutes, you're going to get up and go run back through the house or go take a bath or get your homework or whatever you need to do. I said, in timeout, people are in a place for various reasons, but most importantly to him, and I said this directly, I don't love you any less when you're in timeout. And I don't want you, as my son, to think that people who may make bad decisions, or it's alleged to have made bad decisions, are bad people. I've not met bad people. I've met a lot of people who made bad decisions, and guess what? I have made bad decisions too. So I want him, and I want the community to understand, yes, there are people who need to be in timeout. I believe that strongly. But But most importantly, we are supposed to love that person and care for that person because he or she is going to return to our community, just like my son is going to get up and run through the house. This is a phrase that I coined years ago. I say it every time someone asks me, what do y'all do? And I say, in Nashville, the police arrest the person. We try to arrest the problem. What is the problem? I know what the problem is. I've been doing this all my life. 9 out of 10 people who come to jail today are addicted to a substance when they arrive. That's not an excuse to get them out of it. But what I tell people all the time is people don't break in your house because they like your house. They're not going to break in your house because they like your wallet. They're not going to break in your house because they like your TV. They break in your house because they're addicted to a substance. They will do whatever it takes to get their fix. And if we only want to arrest the person, then we're never going to really fix the issue. And so to me, the police do an incredibly difficult job, but it is incredibly complex to arrest the problem. We know addictions are primary to everything. We run the largest licensed alcohol and drug treatment center in the state of Tennessee. It's unfortunately in the jail, which means once you arrive there, we know you're addicted. We need you. And when I got in this years ago, the research said that if a judge ordered you to treatment, you were less likely to be successful. That research has changed completely today. It doesn't matter who tells you to go. It doesn't matter who tricks you into going. It actually is equally responsive to people. It's just all about the individual. So we try to get all people who need alcohol and drug treatment into treatment while they're in our facility. Earlier this past year, a passion of mine for the last 10 years really has been to decriminalize mental illness. We're the only modern country in the world that I know of, traveled around the world, that if you're naked in the park right now and seeing elephants flying over and you're singing songs, that our country believes that that is a crime. It is a crime only because there's not a whole lot of other alternatives. The reality is most countries see anyone who's naked singing is in need of help, and you send people for help. I don't blame the police. The police are who are called because when you dial 911, there's not the service to go help a naked man. It is a police or a person who is in an ambulance who sees blood or a heart attack, and they're very good at that. Unfortunately, in any community, the police are who arrive, and then what happens is that person's turned over to the criminal justice system. And so what I wanted to do was, I hope the CIT model works. I hope every idea that every mayor and every police chief works. I'm all for it. I support what Chief Drake said. But I will tell you what, I'm not going to wait and see if it does work. I've been here doing this for 20 years. I've heard other people say they're going to do a lot of different things. I'm not saying they were wrong or that they didn't do it, but it didn't happen. And so what happens is then the jail becomes the fallback, de facto mental health facility, because once they're dropped off, what do? We take them to court, we take them through the process, and they end up in a convicted, assigned to a probation officer, and are very unlikely to be successful. So what I did was I took money years ago, a few years back, when we were trying to get a new facility built downtown. I don't know if I was lying, but I surely wasn't telling everybody, we're going to build a mental health center, build a mental health center. I was going to say, give us the money that the city has been spending to do what is jails and criminal justice, and I'm going to move that money. I'm going to direct that money and build what we need. And so right beside the detention facility that's built downtown is a $10 million, 60-bed behavioral health center, one of a kind in the whole country. And tonight there are people who have been decriminalized since we've been on this call. Instead of going into the jail, they're in the hands of mental health professionals. So very excited about that as we go forward. There are tons of programs. I'd rattle them all off. I know we'll get some questions. We have programs involving dog training. You see a lot of that. Super cool to watch various people who are clean and sober and see an animal showing them love and them showing one another what that does to the individual. And I've often believed it helps even in folks who've been very poor parents when they're addicted. When they're sober and clean, they see the need of what that does. So we do a lot of animal programming. Songwriting, it sounds real silly to people. It has nothing to do with selling songs. What it has to do with is a lot of people in jails, especially men, aren't comfortable with their story. They're not comfortable with the fact that I saw my dad hit my mom, and so I hit my girlfriend because I thought that's how you treat women. And so they can't say that. But what's amazing to watch is people who write songs pull their story out of them and tell the story in the version of a song. And we believe it reaches a place in that individual that may have a chance to make changes in their life. We do high set, the education, cosmetology. The reason we do the cosmetology is a very good skill to teach because you can do that in the streets tomorrow when you get released. It's a practical, I get my hair cut by a person who was in jail. That's what I believe. In my mind, it is a very good skill to learn. And it's also something we can teach while you're here. RDAPT is a drug and alcohol treatment program that we also run. Steer and Clear is a driver's license restoration program. Driver's license are harder than getting a vaccine. I'm sorry, that's just my frustration. Driver's license are complicated issues that most people in our community need to survive. And for years, it's not anybody individual's fault. We've taken those away for all sorts of different reasons. And ultimately, these people who we've now got sober and clean, who are on their way to their job that we're trying to get them, they get released from jail and they have no way to get there. So ultimately, we had to restore license. Steer and Clear restores driver's license. We worked with the public defender a few years ago to start the program. It's fantastic. Over 2,000 people now have a driver's license tonight that didn't have them, and many others who can't get their license have had their fees waived. This is a phrase that gets me in trouble. My staff always cringe when I say this. I've never said no. What does that mean? If you walk with me tomorrow and say, I think we should try to issue green pants, it might help because green is a soft color. And if we play music and wear a hat at the same time, I believe it helps people. My opinion about treatment and helping people who are going to jail is like going to the mall. I've been to the mall a bunch of times. I have no idea when I go in what I'm after. I end up with a cookie. And then other nights you go out there looking for shoes, you buy clothes. I don't believe people who go to jail, or sometimes even people who go to the mall, really know what they're going for. And when you arrive and you're strung out and you've been arrested and your life's in upside down, it is not acceptable for us to think we know exactly what's best for you. My job is to provide every programming opportunity we can, so while you're in the custody of the sheriff's office, you have a chance to change your life. That's who we are. That's why I think it's supposed to be done. People ask me all the time, I don't care if you're on the far right or far left of this subject, people who are on the far right want to worry about their money. You know, the programs work, are they worth it? You know, my money, I can't. And I say, sure, they work. If you're on the far left and you care about people and you really want to see people's lives change, I can show you what it does. This is the last 10 years in Nashville, Tennessee's jail population. In 10 years, the population is cut in half. And so if you do the math with me, 2,200 people were in custody in 2011, and tonight it's 1,186 people. I've said this all day, kind of cutting up with people around me. The way I look at it, in 10 years, you won't need a sheriff, and that's a good thing, because we're on track to end the need for that. That may not happen in my lifetime, but that's not a COVID situation. That's not a change in a policy. That's not one person. That is a lot of work in trying to reshape what is the criminal justice system that we have some involvement with. So my mouth's dry. Y'all probably tired of hearing me, but I'll answer anything I can.
Sheriff Hall, I don't think we're tired of hearing you. I mean, you can go on. My text messages are on fire. People are watching this and they are very pleased with what they are hearing. And I just want to say thank you. Like, thank you for what you're doing for the city. Many people had no clue. As council members, some of us had no clue about some of these programs. I mean, the diversity piece that you spoke about, the songwriting therapy, the addiction services. I mean, these are just great programs. So Councilmember Toombs and I unmuted at the same time. So I'm going to mute and kick it over to her to start off the questions, and then I'll save some of my questions for the end.
All right.
Thank you, Sheriff Hall. That presentation was excellent. I do appreciate you for spending time with us this evening. I want to dig into your budget a little bit, because you talked about your overall budget being roughly $100 million. 80% of that is salary and benefits. So what's the typical salary and benefits for a corrections officer? And two, if you could break down who's on your staff, because I know everyone's not a corrections officer.
So an average correctional officer in our system makes $50,000 or so. The starting pay is $40,000, but I'm giving you an average of when you've been here a year or two and you get through. So about a $50,000 salary. One thing I'm very proud of is that's the highest paid correctional officer in the state of Tennessee, and it ought to be. We want good people; they deserve to be paid. And I want you to know, as I heard Chief Drake, that does not obviously compete with what the police officer is making. I was just saying we're the highest paid in the jail side of what we do. I'm very proud about that. We work hard to recruit them. So the salary is $50,000. About 40% more of that would tack on. So let's say $40,000 or so more or $30,000 or so more would add up to what the benefit cost of that employee. And because we don't have vehicles assigned for people to go home, then that's really the total cost that you're paying in our budget for that individual. We work really hard trying to manage overtime. It's an expense that we work hard to control. Very hard to do in a system like this where you have people working 24 hours. But and so about half of the 1,000 employees that are in the bucket, if you will, of employees here, about half of those are correctional officers. And if you'll just kind of let me round off a little bit, you have another 100 or so people in total out of what we would call our warrants type of division. It's probably a little high, but that number where they're out serving the papers, the courts. We have another 100 or so people who do security in buildings and what you and I would call security staff. You have a support system for those jails, maintenance, laundry, all sorts of transportation. So you start supporting those jails, and then you end up with, a support system that kind of concludes. So I would say half of the officers, and the remaining part is either the support system for those jails or the warrant division that I brought up earlier.
And what type of training do corrections officers receive? And is there a training budget, or is that included in the salary bucket?
That's a great question. Very proud of this as well. The state law requires you train for a week to be a correctional officer. That's embarrassing. We train 8 weeks. We pay them 8 weeks of training. They're inside. That's something I did immediately 25 years ago, was to say you should never go work in a facility until you've been trained with the tools. I don't care what it costs. And so we pay you your full 8 weeks while you're in training. We have our own training division, our own training facility. Call me arrogant, but we're the best. Our staff are the best training people in this area. We have others that we can get now virtually in other ways. But because corrections is not street law enforcement, of course, and corrections is really not similar to other types of work. I don't want them to learn from each other, quite frankly. I want to go get them the best tools to do this job. How do you de-escalate someone who's mentally ill? How do you deal with someone who doesn't really understand the rules of law and rules of expectations? And so it's critically important to me that we both train you, we give you the guidelines. I always call it's recruit, train, retain. And train is the middle of this thing. And so we're trying to train you, and then we want to retain you and keep you. And so our total budget, and this is what's included, our training staff, the cost of leaving those people in for 8 weeks in a year is about $1.6 million in grand total of our budget goes towards training. About 100,000 of that would be outside of Davidson County, where we're trying to get people trained in various aspects all over the country. That all shut down, of course, with COVID. But I personally believe it's important because I can't just send them to TSU or Belmont or these places and get the education type that we need. This is a specialty type of work, and wherever we can find the best training, we've tried hard to do that.
And before I turn it over to Councilwoman Porterfield, a lot of our metro departments are understaffed. We hear that a lot. Do you have issues? Do you feel like you're fully staffed, or are you in need of additional staff? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I feel really good. I mean, one of the things I would love for you guys to help me with, and I mean this, to get our community to understand this, go back to the graph that I really like that is drifting downward. That's what we should all want. The population is reducing. We're doing a lot of really good work in what I think are reform efforts and programming. But one thing that we need to tell people, that doesn't automatically mean that you're saving all kinds of money. For example, if there are 50 people that I could tonight get out of the jail system that are here, that don't belong here because they can't afford to make bond, they need to be at home, or away from here. If we can get that person, it may require me to hire people to notify them of their court dates or to supervise, not them personally, but their cases. And so what we've done over the years is move positions and employees to what you would call non-officer positions, so the individual is no longer in custody in the system. So I'm as proud as I am of the decline in the numbers of people in jail. The resources we've used to do alternatives is really where a lot of that money's gone. I mean, pretrial release, you guys have heard of bail reform. We're all in the middle of that, and I'm all for it. But what I need some help with as we go forward is every time declines in jail populations doesn't always mean there's money saved, and I'm talking about dollars to hand back. We will, I feel very good. We're staffed comparable tonight. We do not need additional staffing. Our population is going this way. We should see savings moving forward. but not you guys, and not this year. But I've been here 20 years, and oftentimes people see some trends and they want to see savings and gobble up the money and take away the programming that is absolutely allowing the individuals to be free in the community. And so I need help, and I say that more just as a person, because that money diverted to help people stay out of the system is what I'm trying to do, is divert it into a place and instead of just housing them. And so we're staffed appropriately, and there are savings, I think, in the works. One thing I did not talk about, it might very budget oriented, but there was a discrepancy. Our average daily population today is 1,100 on the graph. I had used a 1,400 today on an earlier graph. What I want you to know is there's 100 people tonight in our jail system that are federal marshal inmates. What does that mean? They're not charged locally, but they're federally charged. You read about a lot of these folks who are involved at the Capitol. Those are federal arrestees. And because we have a contract, we can house the federal marshal's inmates, the federal courthouses downtown. This has nothing to do with immigration. It's federal criminal charges. So what happens is they pay you, I don't get the money, they pay you a contract rate to house 100 of their people. That amounts about $100 a day. It's over $1 million a year. And so they're paying that money back to the community. And so what I would want you to know, the 1,400 represents 100 of those marshal inmates, but really that's not fair to hold that against us as a jail that has reduced our population because we're contracting for that. So a little confusing, but I wanted you to know the population has 100 people in it that are basically helping the federal government out, but you are getting the reimbursement to the city.
Thank you, Sheriff Holly. You kind of touched on that next question about with the decrease in population, how has that resulted in a decrease in the need of funding? So if I understand that correctly, there are savings that are being realized, but that's being diverted to the programs that are allowing people to retain their freedom. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, let me be real candid with you as well. We've been through 5 years of transition. Our buildings, as you and I have talked, I think, we were downtown, we shut down buildings, we tore down buildings. So this is the first year, and then God knows COVID showed up. But this is the first year where we're kind of in place where I can actually cost out what it's going to take to run the facilities and staff it. And that's really where a lot of our money is. I personally believe this time next year, I'm just using a time frame, we'll be in a much better place. And I believe there's real savings that we can come forward. I think the mayor's office has sent out emails saying, to prepare to reduce budgets and produce those. I think we will be fine to be able to help that. I think there's some savings for sure in the sheriff's office, but I just needed some understanding. And right now, tonight's a great example. We have COVID and we have, quarantined people who are either waiting results and so forth. What that does to us, maybe unlike other places, is we have to separate and spread people out who may be positive, as we all have learned. And what that does to me is it spreads out my staff, and it's a lot more staff intensive when you have people who potentially have been exposed. And so all these wheels are turning around, and it makes me nervous to give you guys a real comfortable number of where are we going to be until I get my hands around, another 6 or 8 months in this new facility, and hopefully COVID settles into a place that's a routine. But I'm very proud of the programs that we talked about earlier, the mental health facility, for example. I took 18 officer positions out of them. I got rid of that term. We now call them technicians. They wear scrubs. They're living in a treatment environment. And so in a way, what I would say to you is I've moved law enforcement corrections money and put it into mental health, although it's still under my roof, if you will. So I see that as diverting the money into the hands of the mental health providers instead of, and one of these days, I hope that our community finds ways where people who are mentally ill don't come in contact with police and us both, because that's where we all want to be. But I don't think that's going to happen quickly. And so I wanted to build a facility where when you arrest that person and bring them into the system, we can decriminalize them upon arrival.
Thank you so much. That was great information, and that leads into the next the next questions. I'm going to bundle them together, and then after this set of questions, we'll kick it back over to Councilmember Toombs. So you've spoken a little bit about some of the programs you have in place. Could you tell us a little bit more about what programs you offer and what percentage of your budget goes to those programs? And then about the Behavior Treatment Center, can you tell us just a little bit more about the center? And is it just for incarcerated individuals? And how can we mimic this with non-incarcerated individuals? Because if we had some of this for people prior to incarceration, then, maybe they wouldn't get into the system. So any thoughts on that? And then lastly, if you could speak to, so we see that your total number of inmates have declined, but what do these programs do with your recidivism rate? Like, have they had any impact on recidivism? Are we seeing the same individuals coming back into the system? So if you could speak to those, I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's my favorite. So here's the thing. I've been here a long time, as I said earlier, and we had a mental health court in Nashville for 25 years or so. Very proud. It's a great court. It works well. But because we have the custody of everyone the police department is bringing in and others, that individual lives with us and we live with that person. And so what I began to see over the years is there was a mental health court and there was a lot of efforts in our community to do different things, but I found that the jail system became kind of the de facto mental health institution. And so I wanted to know why. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, started meeting with the DA, the police chief, and judges and mental health professionals on a monthly basis, and to try to understand. And here was a basic question: what is the number one reason a mentally ill person comes to our jail? Now, that sounds simple, and it was simple, but I will tell you, all of us experts, and I'm one of them too, I thought, but the police chief at the time, the DA at the time, the public defender at the time, you can pick them all. We all think we know what we're doing, and none of us knew the answer to the question. Everybody had the wrong guess. The number one reason a mentally ill person was coming to jail, I haven't looked at this in the last few months with the COVID stuff because that's kind of skewed a lot, but the number one reason a mentally ill person comes to our jail in Nashville is not a new crime. It's failing to do something we shouldn't have asked them to do anyway. And what does that mean? Give them a court date, give them a probation officer, and expect them to make it. I can't make probation in Nashville because I can't get anywhere on time. I'm not very organized with some of my thoughts. And the reality is, if you take a person who is mentally ill and is off their medication and expect them to be successful on a thing called probation, you're setting them and all of us up to fail. I did a lot of work studying what percentage of people who are mentally ill are successful in probation. It's right at 20%. 80% of the time, a person who's placed on probation who is mentally ill, they fail. So what happens is Chief Drake's staff are called to the naked man in the park, and because people want to call, I understand that, the police show up. What people don't realize is oftentimes the police officer doesn't have discretion to make that arrest. You know why? There's a pending warrant for Darren Hall downtown because I didn't go to court 6 months ago or 5 years ago. So the police officer could have the best discretion in the world. They could be the person who wants to drive them to this new treatment center in Bordeaux or Bellevue or wherever, and they've got this great idea, but you can't do that in a lot of cases because there's a pending criminal activity that they're required to. So what I learned was, if that's going to be there, I don't want that to happen. So when they bring me that person, why can't we divert them over? And so the experience we had was mentally ill people caught up in the criminal justice system were oftentimes by police. It is not their fault. They're called. Someone has to take the naked man somewhere. There's not a lot of places to go. But even if you think you could take them directly to a treatment center, the reality is there's a pending criminal case. So the police officer, by policy, has to get that issue resolved. And so what you find is they're going to bring us people who have criminal pending warrants. And when that happens, I want them to go directly in the hands of mental health. And so the reason I got so active in what I call the mental health world is because the jails became places, not because police are bad people, or not because the people are bad, they're making phone calls, but it all set up a revolving door of bringing people in and out. For example, we have a mental health court, but when I was looking into it, of the people who are coming to jail in Nashville, and this has been a few years, of the people who come to jail who are diagnosed mentally ill in our jail, I was asking what percentage of them get into the mental health court? That's where we need them. What percentage? So I was guessing 80, 85%. It's 5%. 5% of the people who are diagnosed mentally ill can get into the mental health court. A lot of that's because of volume. A lot of that's because of other things. But what it tells me is, and that means 95% of people who are mentally ill are going into a courtroom tomorrow morning in front of a judge and lawyers who really are treating it like a criminal case instead of the fact that this person is ill. So what I wanted to do is, if you're going to set that system up, which it's been going on for years, I wanted on the back end for that person to be decriminalized upon arrival to the jail so they didn't go right back through the system. So I know you asked the wrong question, because you know why? That gets me all going, and that's what happened. So I'm sorry about that.
Can I just one quick follow-up before Councilmember Toombs jumps in? Thank you for sharing that about the 5% that are going to the mental health court. How do we expand the capacity? I mean, I'm assuming you're working with mental health court. Is this just a funding issue that they need more funding to have a bigger capacity, or how can we help make sure that more people get to the correct court?
Okay, so let me get this real clear. So Judge Blackburn, mental health judge, is a good friend of mine. We're on the same page about all of this. So don't hear this wrong, but I don't want them going to court. I don't believe the courts are the place to deal with it. I think it's pre-booking. It's pre-court. It's because the collateral damage of a person who goes to court, not mental health court per se, but truthfully, you still have fines and a criminal history and other issues that cause that mentally ill person to struggle through the process. And to be selfish about it, it also is a lot of expense and energy for the world of jails and other places to take that person, book them, house them, transport them, go into a courtroom, when really they need care in the mental health world. And so we built this facility on the front end of the building, so right there is where we hope to get you the help. That is not anti the mental health court, but I'm trying to get, if you will, the diversion to occur earlier so that those do have to go to court can.
Thank you for clarifying. I agree. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
I see my little thing move. Can you hear me, Sheriff Hall?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just making sure. So with all the talk about the behavioral care center and the mental health issues that a lot of the folks who come in contact with the criminal justice system are facing, how do you respond to recent calls about decreasing funding to law enforcement and diverting some of those funds that we spend on law enforcement, diverting those funds to those services such as mental health services? For example, your behavioral care center, which is only helpful to people once they've been arrested. So would you be, what do you think about that? And would you be open to whatever you spend on that behavioral care center, perhaps that's given to some mental health agency to run that center outside of the jail?
Yeah, so let me be real clear about this. I think this is a great question, by the way. I mean, and just so you know, I was deep in this stuff 5 or 6 years ago. And what's interesting is I never thought we'd be having this part of a conversation, meaning defund or whatever, wasn't a word. And I'll say this, I mean, I've grown up around a lot of police officers, they're my friends. I think they get a lot of bad raps. There's our bad cops, I get it. But what I mean by this is I think you should move money from the sheriff. I mean, 30% of the people tonight in jail are diagnosed mentally ill. 30% of the people that Chief Drake is going to be called out to the scene are going to be diagnosed mentally ill. 30% of the people, and let me just say historically, today is a little weird with the COVID skewed, but courtrooms, probation officers. The reality is, and this won't all happen in my lifetime. I don't think. I'm old, so maybe it'll happen quick. But the point is this. You should take 30% of all of our money. But you should commit they will never deal with those problems again. The money goes, and so too does the problem. I would be scared to death if I was Chief Drake and say, take 30% of my money. Because I don't know that I would have the confidence, I'm just talking about his job is different than mine, that I would have the confidence that tomorrow when the naked man is in the park, is the community really ready to call someone who drives up and has on balloons in their ears and hats? I mean, I don't care. I mean, I'm just making this, whatever that new service is, who's going to go get them? So my point is, I don't like the tone, this is just Darren, I don't like the tone of defund the police because it sounds like they've screwed it all up. I think they're asked to do the wrong thing. They shouldn't be going to the naked man. We shouldn't be housing a naked man. We shouldn't be using jail money to build mental health centers. It needs to be moved. I mean, the mental health institutions in the 60s were emptied because the country wanted to deinstitutionalize them. We didn't do that at all. We reinstitutionalized them in jails and prisons. But you know what? It's not their fault. You know whose fault it is? legislative bodies. That's who makes the law. I'm not you, but that's what's happened. We never funded mental health centers from the 60s till now. It's never been done. And so what happens is the police get a bad rap, jails get a bad rap, as in, because we're not good at it. We shouldn't be doing it. But unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues aren't comfortable in saying it. And I'm talking about, yes, it should be moved, not because all cops are bad or jails are bad, but because it needs to be placed in the hands of people who are experts. And the reality of the difficulty of a police officer, y'all were asking earlier, I think if you could take that responsibility away, yes, police officers would be better at what they are doing. But you also have to be prepared. And I don't have this answer. Who is going to do that? Who's going to show up and get the naked man? Where are you going to take him? Well, take money away from me and take money away from police and prosecutors. But you have to commit to going and spending that resource and building a system. And I hope it happens. I hope my kids see it happen. I think what's lost in it is I think the criticism of all of us who do what we do makes the conversation hard to be had. And I'm talking more about, against each other. And I'm talking more about the line of work of law enforcement to the community. I think what we do is poorly represented because we won't admit that we're not good at it. Right? Jails are a horrible place to do mental health treatment. That's why we didn't build jails. We built a treatment center. And I think that we can train police officers and train us, and I think we do better than we've ever done. I mean, I've been here a long time. But realistically, that person doesn't even know what day it is. They don't know what the law is. They didn't know we're closed to the park. And so when a police officer pulls up, to get that person in my vehicle and get that person into jail and get that person dressed to go to court, think about all that. It's just complicated. And so, unfortunately, the criminal justice system in our country is where everyone is relied on to help solve that problem. And it's been a failure. There's no doubt about that. That's not Nashville's problem. I promise you. I mean, look around. I lived in Nashville. I grew up in Nashville, right out in Antioch. And not far from where I grew up was a thing called Central State. That was a mental health hospital, the whole state's hospital. It's been replaced by, Dell Computer. That doesn't make Dell a bad place, but we took a mental health institution, tore it down and built a corporation and built a lot of jail and prison beds to replace them. And so that's what happened. And I don't think we should deny it in our side, but I think it takes a huge commitment to move all of that and assure those of us who are doing what we're doing that we won't also still have that problem without the money. That you're asking us to still solve the world of those. I'm probably going to get in trouble because Chief Drake's still on here, and all the people who do what I do are going to be mad at me. But so y'all promise to move the issues with the money. How about that? And we can say that we agree.
Understood, Sheriff Hall. So part of this reimagining policing and trying to do law enforcement differently, there's also the move to get rid of private prisons. And so we recently did that in Nashville, ended the contract with Core Civic. How has that impacted the Sheriff's Office financially? So I have several questions here. So how has it impacted the Sheriff's Office financially? Are we getting the maximum reimbursement from the state? And what are we doing with those inmates that Core Civic was managing? Are they all coming to the new jail facility and being under one umbrella?
Yeah, we're the only sheriff's office in the country that COVID wasn't our biggest crisis this year. How about that? We literally didn't say COVID for a while because our crisis was to take on what is a very large responsibility. I'm talking about transitioning it over. But we were able, our staff did incredible work. It was a lot of work. And back in October, I think that officially happened. We had to move the employees or hire employees into our organization to now, supervise and work in that facility. And as I mentioned earlier, and this has been a little slower, I don't think any intent here, but a little slower, I think, trying to get the supplemental over to the council. And I think that's Metro Finance. We've been working with them just to get the numbers right. And so just soon after moving over there, members of the state and Metro government went and looked at the facility. It has a lot of infrastructure issues that need to be repaired. And I'm not an expert, but I can tell you what they're telling me, the plumbing and fire evacs and so forth. It's a 30-year-old building. It's been used for a long time. It's the state's responsibility, the building is, as in to repair it. I believe the state will repair it over time. But we thought it's safer for all people, our staff and the inmates involved, to move them into an empty facility out on the Harding campus. We've got multiple facilities that are out there that already had inmates in them. But what we did was move 400, the total number, of people who are with Core Civic into an empty facility and then hired the staff, and we're running that facility today out there right across the street from where they were housed before. Your question's a really good one. The cost of us doing that, how that works in the state system is it's called the reasonable allowable cost formula. We have to produce what our costs are, really not on the front end because of the way this happened with Core Civic, but it'll happen on the back end. At the end of the budget year, we produce what our cost to pay, to feed, to house, the healthcare. We produce all that, hand that to the state, and then we, the city, surely expects to be reimbursed what it's costing the city to do this. I've told council members Benedict and O'Connell and others that are very, interested in doing this. Once we get to a point, we'll know exactly what it's going to cost us, and we will go to the state. If the state pays us back, our community, you, not me, that money, then I think it's a fair question to continue moving as we are. If the state is balking with the county on reimbursing the actual costs, then I think lawyers, mayors, council members, and so forth in the state need to have that conversation. I will tell you and show you what it's costing us to do it as a community, and that'll probably happen after budget. I need to get through this, and I can show you. We will go to the state, and then I think that conversation will be very public, probably in September and October, especially if they're not willing to reimburse us. But let me, the total amount, let me just round off a figure. If $15 million is something we come in to you here in a few weeks and say, here's our supplemental we need, that money would be for the salaries of the officers and staff and the meals and the healthcare and all that. So you would move that $15 million into my budget, and that's how we will live the rest of the year. What happens is in July, when we can cost out, I'm just making up a number here, if it's $92 a day for us to house that person, and we do all the math, and the state would owe us $15 million, I'm just talking round figures, you would expect to get the full $15 million, and so would I. If the state wants to play different about that and say, we're only going to give you $13 million because we appreciate what you're doing for us, I mean, I think that's a political conversation, an economic conversation, and higher than me. But yes, I think we're on track to be able to produce all of that. The facility that they were in is presently empty. There's nothing wrong with that. And I say empty as in they have to go expend the money to rehab the infrastructure. So it's inside of our secure perimeter out there. So I think everything is fine. I don't worry about the building. From where we are, and we will maintain, on that site tonight, we probably have 405, probably 800 or 900 people are incarcerated out on that site, varying levels. Some of those were the Core Civic people before, and some of those are ours, misdemeanors and so forth that are out there. So it's been a complex, complicated few months of getting all that done just because we had to bring the staff on and get all the stuff. I mean, keep in mind, these are all private employees. We had to get them into the civil service system and all the testing it took to do it. But anyway, very, hopefully that's behind us, and we should be communicating with you as we go forward on the expenses coming from the state.
Thank you so very much. And we're down to about our last two questions. And then it looks like Council Member Soror has her hand up. And then we'll be wrapping up unless we have another really brief question. So the last two questions is, do you all offer translation services for our inmates that speak another language? And if not, how much would it cost to add that service? And then the next question, you may have touched on this, but I just want to make sure that we have it correctly here. What happens to the old jail facility, and is there a cost to maintain, secure that facility? And if it is a facility that you all are not using, is there any interest in donating that to public use to make it some type of, maybe a workforce development center or some type of center that could be used like for the benefit of the community?
Yeah, let me go that one first, and I'll go to the translation next. I do think, and I've thought about this before, I do think the facility needs to be repaired by the state, which is their job to do that. And I'm going to round figures here. It's probably a $10 million expense, my thinking. Our folks have told me that. So if I know what the state and how long it takes to get some of this stuff done, I see that being a couple of years or more before it's all done. We don't need the beds. We don't need the building in a world. And because it's really state money, it would be very hard and I say hard, Metro would have to get in some arrangement with it. Personally, I believe what will happen is it can be restored, and my hope is that you don't need it for what you and I would call jails. And one of these days, the fences can come down, and that facility could be used. I could see it as a day reporting center. I mean, you report there and receive training and classes and so forth. We do some of that now, but it will be a while. I don't see a real good use for Metro's purposes because it is the state's building. But I think longer term, if we stay in this arrangement with the state and they restore the facility, then I think we as a whole government should look at it and say, what is the best use? Its location makes it uncomfortable. You're inside kind of this circular compound and it's in the center. And so it'd be hard to get in and out of it, for programs and things, unless you had some ties to the criminal justice system, unfortunately, until we tear everything down. And I mean, I can foresee the day where that happens, where you don't need any of those facilities on Harding Place. And you could really kind of tear that down and rethink what can you do. So that's, but I would say, if you're asking me, I think that's 5 to 10 years away from just completely tearing it down. I think in the next 3 to 4 years, you'll have that building restored by the state so it can be used for whatever direction. The translation service, for years and years, we used the language line. We now have a different provider. Basically, what that means is any language that is spoken, we can dial up the services. This is a web-based program. It's called Purple, I believe, is the name of it. And we use it because you can imagine from the healthcare side to the treatment side to just a clear communication systems of needing a variety of languages spoken. And so we've seen that to be, unfortunately, the recruitment of especially Spanish-speaking staff is paramount. And when we have many, but we also have a very spread out facility where you need all sorts of people that can speak and communicate. And so our dream would be to have the languages spoken by our staff so we can communicate easily, but we at least have a backup with the Purple system.
Thank you. And Councilmember Sora, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sheriff Fall and Chief Drake. This has been an interesting conversation. And thank you for the work that you're doing. I didn't send in a question because my question came out of the comments that you've made and all the great programs that you have. I'm glad we all agree that doing something on the front end will be the best way to go, but we're glad you're doing what you're doing on the back end. So the question that I have for you on the behavioral services is that by the time these people come to you, they've already been to court, they now have a record. Part of the work that you do with them, does it include finding a way to get rid of that record, an expungement of some sort, so that at least that does not tag on with them later, especially since you've decided when they got to you that what they need is behavioral care. And so is there a way to also make sure that that record goes away? Are you doing that as part of your services? Thank you.
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question. The reality of it is, and I kind of hinted to this earlier, one of the things that I realized was that the individuals who are mentally ill, who are going through a traditional courtroom and then being placed on probations and all these things and given court dates that they weren't going to be successful with, what I realized is then that individual is being arrested for violating a court date or a probation, brought back in the system and only to recycle. And so what I wanted to do and what we did in our design was to have this facility where once you're brought in and you go through the program and on the mental health, behavioral health side, the legal term is NOLI. I went to the district attorney. He deserves a lot of credit for willing to work with me on this because they control the criminal case that may have brought them down here. So I worked with them and the public defender and said, look, can we not, if the person goes through mental health in lieu of this arrest, can we not get the charges NOLI'd? And that's the legal term of it. But that's the way the DA wanted to do it, which works fantastic. And what would happen is you come in, those charges or the charge that they brought you down here for being naked in the park are kind of pending, if you will, or hanging. But upon completion of the mental health, my staff go to the DA's office and they nollie all of that arrest. And so that's the way we avoid that arrest and the collateral damage for it moving forward. My dream of it, and we still keep working on this, is that not only can we do that, but maybe we can even in the future expunge a lot of your criminal history. And I'm saying that so it doesn't harm you moving forward once you've made changes in your life. And so we are definitely doing what your question asked, which is to eliminate that arrest. But I see where some of the history of the criminal arrest are also going to hurt them moving forward, and we're trying to work with that. And the DA's office has been great, I have to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Suarez, for that question. One last question, Sheriff Hall, before we wrap up, because this one just came in via text. And it goes back to Core Civic and your office taking over the management of those inmates. Is there a chance where I guess your office could cease to manage those inmates and turn that back over to the state? And if that were to happen, the state could go back to asking Core Civic to manage that facility again, and Metro will be completely out of it.
Yeah, that is, again, I'm not a legal or political strategist, but that is really where we're headed. I mean, to be honest with you, and what I mean by that is the legal answer is that the sheriff of the county cannot be ordered to take custody of someone who is not real. These people are convicted felons in a sense in a prison. And so when I say that, and don't take this wrong, I, in my role, can say, I'm not going to contract with the state of Tennessee anymore to do that. Here's the problem, though. Down in the weeds, legally, in the small print of this language, all of the land, by the way, that was my dad's old district out there, and the land where all these facilities are, technically is state property granted over to Metro. And way down in the language, and I'm not a lawyer, and thank you, you can help me get through this. The language says that if Metro were to, violate or the arrangement, the state may take all the land back. Now, what does that mean? That means we have animal control out there. We have recycling centers. We have a South Precinct. We have a fire station. We have that. All that land is technically state property. So the strategy legal question would be, if I were to say, by God, I'm done with this, come get the inmates, then the state could potentially say, then guess what? We're going to take all the land with us. And again, that's one piece of it. I think where we are and where we need to stay is what I mentioned earlier. Let us get through the costing of that. I think the city and the state have got to come to an agreement. Do we want to do it long term or not? My expectation is if we, myself and the city wants to get out of housing their inmates for them, gosh, I want to make sure that that's not detrimental to the city. I mean, the expenses, it would be $500 million to move all those facilities, that are Metros off that property. So, but the answer is yes, technically we could get out of it, but I want us to be careful because the lawyers have told me for years that down in the print, we could get ourselves in some trouble.
Thank you for that response. And thank you once again for spending time with us this evening to answer our questions and to dig into the Sheriff Department's budget. And thank you, Chief Drake, once again for coming and talking about MNPD's budget. We really appreciate y'all's time and appreciate your assistance in helping us to educate the public. And to everyone who is watching, we're back at it again next Thursday at 6 p.m. for the second part of our public safety series. And y'all have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.